slider, you can pull the screen over, make the presentation smaller, and that will enlarge the space for the rest of us.
Oh, I see. Well, thank you. Okay, so good morning, everyone. My name is Martha Shields from the Environmental Finance Center, and I want to welcome you all to the first workshop in this three-part workshop series focused on crafting successful proposals towards sustainable financing of climate resilience and stormwater-related projects. This series offers knowledge sharing, idea exchange, real-world advice, and hopefully inspiration. The idea behind the series is that participants are led through successive sessions that build upon one another, from first understanding what grant agencies are looking for in their applications to ultimately in the third of the series, we will start to think more broadly about how to pay for environmental programs and infrastructure by thinking more about financing and less about funding, less about relying on grants and more about thinking about actual financing of programs for sustained programmatic success. Today's focus is about navigating grant programs. The goal today is to discuss how grant programs can be used to fund climate resilience solutions and to identify some solutions that have been used in other places or that could be pursued to make access and use of grants just that much better. My name is Martha Shields. I am at the New England Environmental Finance Center. The New England EFC is based at USM, and our mission is to help communities gain capacity to pay for their environmental programs. We tend to focus on stormwater financing, watershed restoration financing, and I also have kind of an out-of-the-box project working with the Maine craft beverage industry, which is a really fun project. I will now turn it over to Victoria Boundy, and then she'll turn it over to Nathan Robbins, who are co-hosting this workshop with the New England Environmental Finance Center. So Victoria, I'm going to hand it over to you. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Martha. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for taking so much time on a beautiful day. My name is Victoria Boundy. I'm Community Engagement Coordinator with Casco Bay Estuary Partnership. As it sounds, we're a partnership of many types of organizations, and we work to protect and restore Casco Bay. I have a background in community planning and development, so I've been working and partnering with a lot of folks to run municipal workshops and trainings on a variety of coastal issues, and especially climate resilience. So anyway, it's nice to see you all, and I'll turn it over to Nathan to introduce himself.
Good morning, everybody. Great to be with you all. Thanks so much for joining us. Yeah, and especially on such a nice summer day. I work as the climate change specialist and manage the climate and adaptation program at the Maine Department of Environmental Protection. So my primary focus, and certainly as it relates here today, is to help communities further their resiliency efforts, to work through any issues and identify solutions, to connect resources and other assistance providers. So don't want to take up too much time, so we'll hand it right back over to Martha and get into the good part. Thanks so much.
Great, thanks. So before we get started, we want participants to get a better idea of who else is in the room. So one way to do that is to please add your name and affiliation next to your name. And I think that you do that through there's 3 dots, I think, next to your name. I think that's how you add your affiliation, right? Could somebody help me out there?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So please add, like, just besides your name, right, you know, what organization or municipality you're from. And after you do that, please look at your screen because I'm going to do a quick little poll. Do you see the poll up? I see it up. I don't know if everybody does. Yeah, okay, I see some heads. So let's get to the poll. Are you here representing please add, your affiliation there and then click submit. Everybody done? Okay. Can we get the results? Oh, great. So overwhelmingly from municipal government, staff from municipal government, which is great because this workshop is geared a lot to municipal government staff or volunteers. There's also quite a few people from state government and from academic institutions. That's kind of surprising. So I think we have a really great mix of people today, and hopefully it will prompt some really interesting discussion about what we think about the grant writing process. Okay, so I'm going to close that. We also want to thank all the other participants for taking time to join us and help us today. All of you are so busy these days, and like Victoria said, on a beautiful day like this, we really appreciate your presence. I want to give a special thank you to the people who are helping us put this workshop together, and those include the technical facilitators, who are Leah Soloway from the New England Environmental Finance Center, and Pang I'm so sorry, Pang. South Issambath from the Greater Portland Council of Governments, and to our facilitators and scribes that you will meet in the Zoom rooms when we all split up. And those are Tam Mittman from the New England Environmental Finance Center, Alan Kratz from Resilience Works, Annette Wilson from Cutler Institute at USM, and Harold Spetla from the Greater Portland Council of Governments. So next, I'm going to turn it over to, who am I turning it over to? I think I'm turning it over to Victoria.
Yep.
Thank
All
you.
right. Thanks, Martha. I've only got a few minutes here, so we'll quickly go over the agenda for the morning. If you could advance, there we go. So we are going to be using a variety of formats today. It's relatively long workshop by virtual standards, so we're going to try to mix it up a little bit, and we hope you'll stay for the entire thing. So we're going to start off by briefly doing a poll that gets at limitations and constraints. So trying to get a handle on how climate resilience is or is not part of your municipality's priorities and budget. Then we'll be moving right into breakout rooms. We're going to have 4 breakout rooms, about 10 people per room if everybody shows up. We'll have a facilitator and a scribe in each of those rooms. And I wanted to note that the discussions happening during that time will not be recorded. And the reason for that is we want to make sure that you can have a frank discussion about some of the challenges and constraints you've had with various grant programs. And Leah will be just zooming you right into those rooms, so there's nothing you need to do. You'll automatically get sent into a room. So we'll be discussing 3 questions in those rooms. Then we'll take a quick break so you can get a drink, go to the bathroom, whatever else you need to do. And then we'll rejoin the common room where facilitators will be briefly reporting out on the highlights of the discussions. At that point, we'll be moving into the presentations. We have 4 funding program managers from various state funding programs, and they'll be presenting on the nuts and bolts of their programs, as well as what makes a successful grant application for their program. And then we'll hear from 3 case study presenters who've worked with one or a number of these programs. And both of those sessions will have time for Q&A, which we will utilize the raise hand button for, and you can also use the chat function if you're more comfortable sending a question through that way. And then we'll wrap up and talk about what's next in the workshop series and let you go. So that's how the day is going to run. Now I'm going to quickly turn it over to Nathan to talk about some guiding principles for the morning.
Thanks, Victoria. Real quickly, just a couple of ideas here to impart before we get started. We know you're all expert meeting goers, so this will be pretty routine, but good meeting practice. So as some food for thought, and my food of choice for discussion is pie. So there you have it. But our intention really is, of course, to support the objective of the meeting. And that's to come away with sharing some ideas and some solutions for navigating grant programs, and having been inspired by some of the stories that we hear today, hopefully some short list of funding opportunities and some new connections made. We want to strive to present solutions. So again, this is about identifying issues, but also about raising those solutions so we can work and continue the conversation. So please, any of those solutions and issues are appreciated. We ask you to be a part of a team, explore a diversity of ideas, learn together, respect each other's views, and keep flexible, as this is both a conversation we're having today and, of course, as many know, as part of a bigger, longer term discussion. We ask that you think about stepping up and stepping back, giving other people a turn to speak, and supporting each other in that. And most importantly, have fun. So, staying light will keep us nice and creative as well. And we hope that you make, again, at least one new connection today. So thanks so much. And we'll jump into the first exercise.
So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go into talking about limitations and constraints that municipalities face with when they're trying to figure out which grant to apply for, when to do that, how to write a good grant. So what I'm going to do is launch a quick poll. And we're going to try to figure out what the group thinks without attribution. This is totally anonymous. So let's go to the first poll, which is, my municipality or organization is discussing the importance of climate resilience. Is that a yes or no or unsure? So please submit your answers.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, I have to tell you that somehow I've lost my cursor. My computer's been doing this lately, so I'm not able to move around the screen and check off anything. And when I tried to fix it a couple of minutes ago, it just took me out of the session. So then I had to come back in, but I still don't have the cursor. So I'd like to give it a good swift kick, but that won't help.
Boy, I don't know a solution that I could think of remotely, but you might try your arrows, up and down arrows. It's the only thing I can think of.
The other thing is we can send these to you afterwards, and you can fill them out and be added to the tallies, Susan.
Yeah. Or I could just tell you whatever you would like. So.
Well, let's see the results, and then maybe you can tell us where you fit into these results, if you don't mind being public about it.
No, not at all.
Okay, great. So 88% overwhelming. Is that, Susan, is that what you
yes.
would have chosen?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So great to see that municipalities are discussing the importance of climate resilience in their communities. I do see some no's and some unshores, and hopefully we can try to inspire you to, whoever is a no or unsure, try to inspire a more open discussion in the municipality about climate resilience. Okay, great. So that's great. Let's go to the next poll. Okay, thank you. My municipality or organization has identified climate resilience projects to be implemented in the next 3 to 5 years. Yes, no, or unsure.
Yes.
Great, awesome. Can we see the results?
It looks like there are still a couple of people who are
Oh.
polling, so I'm going to hold off just a sec.
Thank you. Oh, great. So a little less than the first question that we saw, but I see that 80% of you are in a good position to be implementing some climate resilience projects in the next 3 to 5 years. Hopefully even sooner. I don't know really why we said 3 to 5 years, but we just wanted to get an idea of what is out there for the future, and it's a very positive sign. The next question sort of follows this idea, and that is, the next question is, my municipality is currently seeking funding for climate resilience projects. So those go hand in hand. So is your municipality currently seeking funding for climate resilience projects? Yes, no, or unsure? Oh, I'm sorry, Susan, I didn't get your number 2 answer.
Oh, it was yes.
Oh, awesome. Good.
So we are so far using tax dollars. But I'm here because there may be opportunities for grant funding as well.
Oh, great. That's great. Yeah, you know, you can only do a limited amount of work with general funds, so.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, great. Oh, great. So a lot more unsures about this, but most people are, yes, seeking funding for climate resilience projects, and that's exactly what we're going to be talking about here today. So that sets us up really well to go into the next session, which is our first roundtable of grant writing challenges. We call it World Cafe 1, and we're going to launch right into that now. So I'm going to hand it over.
So I'll give you a little brief introduction on what we're going to be doing here. So in each room, again, there will be 4 rooms, and we have 4 facilitators and 4 scribes, and we'll be discussing these questions. We'll get about 10 minutes per question, I believe. The first one is, what are some of the local roadblocks or challenges on advancing climate resilience and stormwater management in your community, or if you're an organization that you've observed in communities that you've worked in? So that's the first one, and we'll be discussing that in a roundtable. Second one is moving more into providing suggestions. What are your suggestions to improve the grant application process? Now, when we say the grant application process, we're talking in a generic sense about any programs that you work with, and to make it easier for your community to submit an application. And thirdly, the third question gets at regionalism or working in partnership. How do we promote better coordination between municipal departments, multiple municipalities, and other partners to advance our shared resilience goals? So our co-host Leah will be in the main room. As I said, she'll be sending us into our respective rooms, but if you get bumped out or if someone joins us late, she'll be there to reassure you and get you in the right place eventually. The facilitator will get everyone going in each of the rooms. A scribe will be taking very detailed notes. Now, what we're going to do with these notes, again, there will be no attribution, but we'll be putting it all together in sort of a report form, because one of the goals of this series is to have an exchange of information between funders and people who apply for funding, so that there's a conversation going there, so that ultimately we can improve the process. So we will be sending out those notes not only to all of you, but also to the funding agencies, the Maine Climate Council, and others without attribution. Leah will be popping in to make sure we're on time and on task, giving us little 5-minute warnings and 60-second countdowns. And that's how it's going to work. And I don't think I missed anything. So stay tuned, and suddenly you're going to pop up in a smaller room, which will be nice.
The only thing I wanted to add is that at the end, you don't have to do anything. You'll be brought back into the common room, and then we'll have a break. So you don't have to do anything, just stand by and you'll be taken into your respective rooms and brought back.
Are you ready to launch, Victoria?
I think we're ready to go.
Okay, sounds good.
Hey, folks. Excuse me. A little echo.
Okay, so it's 10 o'clock. Let's just give people one more second to come back, and then we'll start out on reporting out.
Okay, here we go. I think I've gotten rid of my echo. Yep, I'm seeing folks starting to come back on. And still quite a little bit of blank screen, so just, I know folks are not using their videos, which is just fine, but also seeing some videos come in, so okay. Here we go. All right. So it's 10:01. We'll get back into it. Hope people are feeling more refreshed. I know I am. Just give your eyes a break even. Again, we'll just do a quick review of our agenda. We are going to do our report out. Facilitators will take 5 minutes each, and we'll do that. And then we're going to move to our next keypad polling exercise. Then we will hear from our great panels of presenters. First from our funding program managers, and then from stories from communities on successful case studies. And then we'll adjourn. So I think without further ado, let's go on to our report out. So Peng, if you can switch us over. Yep, we've got a shared Google Doc here. Tammy's gonna help with taking notes for us so we can all see this. And I'll facilitate this section. I'm gonna call on each of our facilitators to report out. So let's see, we have, who wants to go first? I see Alan, I see Victoria and Martha all standing by. Okay, great. Martha, do you want to start it off?
Sure, I'll start it off. I was the facilitator for group 2, and I'm just going to go really quickly through the 3 prompts. The first prompt was, what are the roadblocks or hesitation in your community to advance climate resilience or stormwater programs? The first point that was made was there's agreement that there needs to be action, but the barriers seem to be prioritizing projects and then funding them. Second point was it helps to have a capital improvement plan that builds in resilience to the routine maintenance tasks that municipalities do every day. There was another comment that technical information that is needed sometimes is very expensive. And getting people involved is difficult. I'm going to move to prompt number 2, which was suggestions to improve the grant application process. And some comments here were a really good one is to have sort of like the idea of a common app, to have one application where you can use just one application to apply for a variety of grants to save time and money. Also would be good to have training workshops on grant writing. And the third bullet I have is a circuit rider idea, where a circuit rider would provide technical assistance to communities. Okay, and then prompt number 3 was how to promote coordination between municipalities and partners. And the first bullet I can suggest here is it is essential to join together with other communities. A good way might be to form network of partners that a technical assistance provider or some entity leads. So a network that is managed by someone and keeps people on task. The third bullet is that smaller communities need incentives to join together, and some of the incentives may be for grant programs to actually require them to join together. And someone mentioned that another incentive could be any savings that is realized through joining together could be given to municipal staff as a bonus or an incentive. And then the third point is that grant agencies have a lot of power to incentivize coordination between municipalities, and also things like making sure that environmental justice communities or communities with economic disadvantages are also incentivized to apply. So grant agencies have a lot of power to incentivize who applies and how they apply. We had a great discussion in the Zoom room, so I hope I captured everything that we mentioned, and I think I did.
Yeah, that sounds like a very, very good discussion. Wish I was joining your room too. Okay, Victoria, you're next on my list here.
That was technically group 4. We had a good mix of municipalities, some regional organizations, and a state agency staff person. Some of the same issues that Martha's group brought up, but under the first question about challenges and roadblocks, local match can be very hard to plan for. and the timing can be very tricky within the budget, inside or outside of the budget season. That was the first one that came up. Secondly, tension between short-term and long-term needs. Climate resilience is clearly in the long-term bucket, but while you may be planning for a long-term resilience project, there are many other more immediate needs that crop up, so it can be hard to plan. Third one would be staff turnover, both for municipal staff, especially if it happens in the middle of a grant-funded project, but also for outside organizations that are partners. Project manager turnover can be tricky as well. A regional organization staff person said that communities, and the smaller communities in particular, can be very intimidated and overwhelmed in every step of the way, but also are limited in being able to pay professionals to do some of the grant seeking and grant writing. Moving on to the second question, suggestions to improve the grant application process. These programs are very competitive, so one person suggested that perhaps a portion of the funding, perhaps portions should be divvied out or set aside for each sub-region rather than having one blanket application. And that would provide communities with more incentive to put in an application. A couple of people mentioned that it would be helpful to have an ongoing mechanism somehow to run project ideas by funders, and asking how viable is our project? Are we on the right path? State agency person said that they do that on an informal basis. But one-on-one technical assistance can be hard and onerous. So what are some possible mechanisms to be able to run your project by before you actually apply? People felt that the state grant programs are generally pretty straightforward. Federal is a different issue, but they felt that the state grant program applications were fairly clear and straightforward. But when communities are applying for both federal and state programs, perhaps sequencing their project, that can be tricky, and it would be nice to have similar processes, for instance, for procurement. So that was brought up as a suggestion. And lastly, two more things. Grant writing training would be helpful, to echo Martha's group. And lastly, it would be nice for applicants who are not successful in getting grants to get feedback from grant funders. What could I have done better? How could I have produced a successful application? Hopefully I'm not going too fast for Tam. All right, and moving on to the third question about partnerships and collaboration and coordination. To encourage collaboration between communities, it was suggested that funders could either make it a requirement, or they can provide an incentive like the Community Development Block Grant Program does, where communities get extra points if they collaborate and apply together. Just giving Tam time to catch up here. On the point of multiple departments working together as a team within the same municipality, someone suggested that if their town council has endorsed work plan items as a high priority, in a council session, that offers more clear direction, and departments are more apt to fall in line and make sure that they work together to get that goal and project done. So getting a council's blessing and getting their their thumbs up as a high priority project. How are we on time here? Okay. It can be helpful for municipalities to partner with organizations that can play more of an advocacy role on certain issues. Let's say pesticide fertilizer ordinance development or that kind of thing. It can be awkward for municipalities and uncomfortable for them to be advocates. So sometimes nonprofit organizations can serve that role. And then someone from one of the larger Casco Bay communities mentioned a Route 1 corridor bike ped project where a number of communities were working together. So they each had a piece of the puzzle, but they were able to accomplish, a broader project without doing it completely on their own. So there were some, economies of scale in that. And hopefully I caught everything. Feel free to enter in the chat room anything that I missed, and we can include that in our notes. And that's it. And it was great. And thank you so much to everybody who participated in group 4.
Thanks so much, Victoria, and good suggestion on the chat box for all those not reporting. Thanks. Alan?
Yes, we had a good group discussion, and basically I would synthesize our findings, our understandings in 3 groups: cooperation and information and assistance. So in terms of cooperation, we identified the fact that it's really important for communities to work together on a regional basis. It becomes difficult if there are several communities along, watershed, and not all of them have the same MS4 requirements and are not in sync. So we didn't really have a solution for that issue, but we certainly recognize that it's important to develop a constituency of advocates all along in a group, so that things can be addressed on a regional basis, because we certainly recognize that the resilience issues don't respect municipal boundaries as much as one might think. So cooperation is a very important part of the grant writing process and the funding process. The second category we discussed was information, and knowing what grants are available. Typically is sort of look and find. Listservs can be helpful in terms of letting people know, letting us know what's available. But that really requires a lot of us just pulling the information and hoping we find it, rather than having it being pushed out to us in a more proactive way. So one of the ideas that we thought about was having a coordinated statewide entity or process that would let everyone know what grants are available, what the deadlines are, what the requirements are in terms of what you need to have to have a successful application. So that's really the finding that we had on the whole issue of information. And then the third thing, and we'll pick up some of the points that both Victoria and Martha have made, technical assistance is a really important aspect of the funding process. And not all of us as municipalities have the same capabilities. So that's why it really does require, as we've heard from the other 2 groups, a more coordinated effort to bring information and to help with the process of filling out forms. Luckily, a lot of forms are online now, and we should encourage that. To the extent that information is needed for these forms, it sometimes has to be done more professionally than just back of the envelope or writing on a napkin. So there are ways of doing this in a more coordinated fashion. And we also talked about the real value of having technical assistance, which is As it turns out, one of the recommendations that's making its way, it's not an official recommendation yet, but it is making its way through the Maine Climate Council, Climate Resilience, the Community Resiliency Group, had a recommendation, as did some of the other working groups, that planning assistance in terms of technical advice is really very important. We also talked about the importance of or the challenge in many projects of making the local match. That becomes a real issue for municipalities. So other states have put in their planning processes and their actual funding processes. They put in place statutes where the state government will provide part of the local match. I think there are about 13 states that have done that already. This too is one of the recommendations. It's not an official recommendation yet, but it's coming through the Maine Climate Council's public engagement vetting process, where there could be a state fund that could help provide the local match for resilience projects. Resilience projects typically are a real challenge because they do require large amounts of funding. It's not the typical little project that is easier to apply for. So that's why the technical assistance and, as I say, some sort of additional funding for municipalities would be helpful. So I think that does it in 4 minutes and 25 seconds. And if anybody else wants to add in the chat bar or speak up, that'd be good.
Nathan, you're muted, I believe.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
All right, great. Yeah, nice, Alan. Thank you so much. And I'll assume that folks will chime in then on the chat box because I haven't heard anybody yet.
Nathan, I'm getting a prompt here. It says my speaker is not working, but everyone heard what I said?
We did. I heard it a little broken up, but I did get it, and I think it looks like Tammy captured well. So
we need better broadband.
We did. Yeah. And that's a whole nother part of this, of course, and then again links back to climate change as well and resilience. So, all right, well, I facilitated as well, and of course, I've done these groups all out of order, but we had some similar themes on our first question. There were some interesting points raised just on the issue of climate change itself, in getting traction on the issue, both from just the size of the issue and having individuals recognize their role and sort of the manifestation of their role within a bigger system, and that they can make a difference, as well as the skepticism of the topic and just need for support in supporting communities on that discussion, sort of a PR related suggestion. There's also, of course, funding, added costs for some of these resiliency projects. There could be marginal, but just grappling with those sorts of costs that can be in addition to provision for resilience. Of course, things that were mentioned before about how that then relates to priorities and juggling priorities, shifting priorities, or just allocating the budget accordingly, especially in a negative budget. And what we're all looking at right now and going forward will be even more challenging. Paired with that is capacity, just the challenge that we all face. And was mentioned. So how do staff spend time on these projects? There was mention of a lot of cross-department coordination on the issue, but again, it just comes back to funding and where we spend our time. And I think that speaks to some of our polling that it is identified issue and priority, but then actually working on it can be challenging. There was a lot of talk about climate change coordinators. Again, that is challenging with the budget going forward. Things like sustainability coordinators are working with regional planning organizations, working multi-community, but again, that's going to look different for different regions based on the capacities of those organizations operating in those regions. So it may not always be that a regional planning organization could fill that. It may be other partners, et cetera. On the second question, scale was mentioned. Just in terms of, again, accessing grants, just understanding what projects fit within a specific grant program. And then also, if it's a small grant, if you already have limited capacity, does it make sense to even pursue it, or should you wait around for a bigger grant? And then just the time to even look at all of these grants and understand them is another issue. There's limited time to even review them. So better assistance on understanding what grants are available, what they apply to, what kinds of uses can you do, and being able to look at that very quickly. It was a suggestion that some of the grant programs be made very broad so that communities can look at them more, their specific projects would fit more within them. And so if you tailor the grant programs too specifically, then we've sort of missed the boat on being able to meet the varying needs from communities. A common app was another suggestion that was mentioned earlier. There was a suggestion to look at a comprehensive list of project needs across the state. So, what do communities need to fund? What is the extent of it, and what is the funding that actually is meeting those or not? So, sort of a gap analysis. There was mention of a specific resource at the Maine Philanthropy Center at USM, that there's some comprehensive list of funding that we should be looking at more closely. There was a suggestion that maybe the way we're doing this is backwards in the first place, that we should actually be providing communities with funding for community resilience right off the bat without even having an application, that they would have funding just to do risk assessment or to do that next step in the process, but it's not actually an application, that this is maybe a one-time, or certainly more discussion there, but some type of fund to help communities in that regard. And then on question 3, there was a suggestion to look at specific regions of the state and look at what are the projects within those towns. Do they have the funding to meet their current projects, and what's the gap? Can they fix all the road issues that they have right off the bat, or what are the benefits of doing that regionally versus doing it on a town-by-town basis? What if they pool their resources together? Would they be able to accomplish those projects more effectively? Grant writers, more support from having capacity, whether it's a regional person who's doing that, or towns have the ability to hire grant writers. And then there was a suggestion around working with existing efforts. So code enforcement officer training was a specific one that was called out, and that we have these are the folks that are sort of working on the ground, looking at development. And so there's a need to look at that training and think about climate lens within there, supporting those individuals more. So we already have a great infrastructure there, but can we just add this climate lens into it and support those individuals? So, okay, I went a couple minutes over, but we're still relatively on time. I think, some really interesting themes from these breakouts. I hope everybody found that valuable, and I think we have some great notes. I want to make sure we leave time for our next part of the day. And I think in summarizing, there were some really clear themes that emerged from the groups, which I think bodes well. So hopefully some common connections were made there, and some shared, some comfort to know that your colleagues are experiencing similar things, and maybe that makes it easier to to work on solutions. All right, so again, we have those notes. We're going to remove all of any names and we'll get those out. So for our next item is limitations and constraints. This will be our next keypad polling. So the first ones this morning, like we did this morning, we'll have those pulled up for you in a second. And actually, just before we get to that, thanks, Peng. So while this morning's questions were really asked about actions that communities are discussing, have identified, or are currently working on, this afternoon's questions are about how work is being done and, with what capacities and organization. So let's get started here. Peng, can you bring up the first question? So we have the expertise and capacity to prepare and process grants in-house. And I think there was a question this morning about, can I answer that from my organization? And I think that you can do that. Or you could also answer that if you're not a municipal representative on something that you're observing or seeing in the municipalities that you work with. Great, give another, 10 seconds here to finish that. And then we'll get the results up. Okay, so sort of a mixed bag here. A little over half of the folks saying we do have the expertise and capacity to prepare and process grants in-house. And then 25% saying, no, we don't have it. And 13%, unsure. So somewhere unclear. Okay, and I think that sort of echoes what we heard in the breakouts. All right, and so for our next question, we often rely on part-time staff, NGO staff, or contractors to prepare and process grants in going after funding. Yes, no, or unsure.
Well, I'm not sure, but Christine may know.
Oh yeah, Susan, I'm sorry, that's right. If you, we should have checked in with you on the first question too.
So no, it's okay. I was so unsure that I couldn't answer, and then I realized, ask Christine. She may have different connections.
I can answer for York.
In this question, does it make sense for those of us who are committee members of municipal bodies of our town? Does that count? We're not staff, we're not NGOs. But Harpswell, for instance, is quite dependent on a vast array of committee volunteers.
Yes, I'm seeing Martha and Victoria also nodding, so I think yes, you can. Okay, so okay, about 50-50 about here, slightly more in the no category. So this certainly speaks to some of the capacity discussions that we were already talking about. Yep, 45%, they do rely on them, part-time staff, NGO, and contractors, and 55% saying no. So, and then for our last question, if we can pull that one up. Do we have a pipeline of projects awaiting grant opportunities? Yes, no, or unsure. We'll just take a few more seconds on this one. Okay. How are we doing? Did we get everybody? All right. Let's see. So,
I'm unsure.
You're unsure. Okay. All right. So that'll kick it up just a little bit in the bottom. So 65% says you do have a pipeline of projects awaiting grant opportunities. That's perhaps why you're here today. You're looking to navigate some grant programs to work on that queue. So that's great. 23% say no. And so maybe there's this is a good opportunity to start thinking about ideas. And I'll just go back to one of the lessons that was reported at the breakout, which is aligning projects with previously identified needs by a select board or council, that may actually be an effective strategy. So hopefully, these probably don't come as a surprise for many of us, but again, hopefully it's comforting to know that others are going through some similar experiences, and a common understanding is, again, really something that we can build on more together. I'm going to turn it over here to Martha. We've caught up a few minutes, which I feel good about, which leaves more time for our presentations. So Martha?
Hi, so great. Now we're getting into the part of the program where we have presentations from 4 funders. Each funder will go for about 10 minutes, followed by a Q&A. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go through the 4 speakers and save our questions for the last part of the Q&A session. So take notes while you are while you are listening to the presentations, and so you don't forget your questions for the different presenters. I will be presenting each presenter, following each other. So I'll break in, and after Ruta, I'll say, okay, Matt is up next, and then Wendy's up next, and then John is up next. I will also keep you on track with time, so I may interrupt and say you've got 2 more minutes left. So the first speaker here we have is Ruta Dennis from the Maine Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. She'll be talking about the Coastal Community Grant Program. All right, Ruta, take it away.
Okay. Hi, I'm Ruta. I'm a coastal and land use planner with the Municipal Planning Assistance Program for the state of Maine. I'm going to be speaking to you about the Coastal Community Grant Program, which we created back in 2012 with the support of Maine Coastal Program, when both of us worked together at the former state planning office. The funding for this program comes from NOAA. You can see the logo in the bottom left there. The grant program continues to evolve to support communities in their efforts to address these high priority goals of the coastal program. And it's an important part of our work in implementing the Growth Management Act. While I speak to you about the types of projects we've funded and amounts awarded under each of these categories, Fang will show you a series of maps that'll take us along the coast headed down east. All of these maps will be available on our website. So here's the first one. And I'll open by telling you that eligible applicants for the grant program include coastal municipalities, coastal communities in the unorganized territories, and regional planning organizations. The term coastal applies to tidal communities and includes communities in the tidal reach of rivers. CCG funds and the whole program is relatively broad. It can be used for planning and design, engineering designs, feasibility and vulnerability studies, outreach and education, and developing regulatory and non-regulatory policies, and project implementation. However, the funds may not be used for land acquisition, purchase of construction materials, permit fees, for construction, or any field investigations that turn dirt, like borings. While the bulk of the awards we've made are to coastal resiliency, the grant program has always been open to accept proposals under the 5 categories you see in the map's legend. At times, the grant program statement has noted a preference to set aside a portion of the funds to a particular category, but preferred set-asides have not been set in stone. The review committee closely considers the merits of each proposal and how it responds to community needs among all the grant categories. So next, I'll provide you with an overview of the types of projects funded in each of those categories and typical grant amounts. Water quality and land use projects are highlighted in blue in all the maps and amount to 30% of the total funds we've awarded so far. The broad category covers water quality and land use, stormwater management, and watershed planning. We've awarded about $610,000 for 23 projects throughout the state's coast. Awards include the intensive work involved with outreach on public education, hand in hand with cultivating citizens' science projects and water quality monitoring. Hands-on involvement has successfully led to communities developing watershed plans and stream smart culvert projects utilizing funding from DEP, grant programs that you're going to be hearing about. Water quality project awards have generally ranged from $15,000 to $50,000. Okay, next category, coastal habitat restoration projects, which are highlighted in green and come in close to 18% of our total awards. Most of the awards happened in the early years of the grant programs because there were a lot of projects waiting in the wings for a source of funding. And we're very lucky that we could be responsive to that with these federal monies. Many projects are the outgrowth of hardworking conservation commissions, local fish commissions, and land trusts. It's not just about the town manager or the town administrator. CCGs have funded engineering design work to improve fish passage with hands-on help on fish counts needed for design, all part of the grant proposal. Planning and design work for culvert improvements utilizing stream smart principles also falls under coastal restoration. It's helped several communities apply for Maine DEP funds for construction of those culverts. We have also supported towns and projects such as Cape Elizabeth moving forward from a more traditional approach to infrastructure planning within public works to one which included habitat impacts in its evaluation of culverts and culvert design, and which also helped broaden its perspective for its stormwater management plan. We've awarded $374,000 for 15 coastal habitat projects ranging from $15,000 to $55,000. Next slide, please. Coastal access projects appear in red in the legend and have only received about 9%. Oops, you need to go back, thing. If you could, it doesn't matter, okay. Appear in red and have received about 9% of the total funding awards. In part, it's because there's other funding sources such as Coastal Program Shore and Harbor Grant Program, but also, as we all know, because of the limited amount of public access sites. However, the $178,000 that we've awarded has provided opportunities for creative projects, such as a management plan for the historic rights-of-way to Belfast Harbor, and Yarmouth developing a plan to connect Yarmouth Village to its working waterfront. Here too, projects have ranged from $15,000 to $25,000. Okay, our wish for Maine, and mine especially, is vibrant, sustainable communities all around. Here it appears in orange on the map. It's a rather broad category, which often isn't listed as a primary goal of projects. People list multiple goals for their project. We've only had the opportunity to fund 4 projects. Open space plans for Bar Harbor in South Berwick, waterfront revitalization plan for Orland, and most recently, downtown plan for Gardner on the Kennebec. I'm saying this out loud. We would like to see more proposals submitted in this category because it only has represented 3% of total funding, and we have the opportunity for creative proposals here too. Well, why don't we stick to this slide as I continue on? Okay, coastal resiliency projects. Yes, they represent 40% of our awards. They're highlighted in yellow. CCG is not all about coastal resiliency. We've got to find other sources of funding for this as well. The bulk of the CCG awards have been awarded to resiliency, in part because it's both it's a priority area for Maine Coastal Program and the work that they fund for the regional councils in their coastal work plans. Lincoln County Regional Planning Commission was one of the first to regional councils to step up and take the lead to shepherd projects on behalf of towns, including Wiscasset and Booth Bay Harbor. SMPDC, Southern Maine Planning Development Commission's current projects include Tides, Taxes, and New Tactics, which is an outgrowth of a partner, Island Institute's work. And SMPDC has just been awarded a grant to engage a city and 4 towns representative of communities along the coast with varied dynamics and varied exposures to coastal risks to develop a model coastal resiliency ordinance, which will be transferable to other communities. And I want to note that this particular project was an outgrowth of the preliminary recommendations from Maine Climate Council's Community Resilience Working Group. The total funds in this category have reached $803,000 for 23 projects over these past years. In a few slides forward, you will see a link to our coastal communities case studies page, so you could learn more about all the projects I've just touched upon. But better yet, you will be hearing from Harpswell Conservation Commission live about its long-term plan to manage the impacts of flooding and storm surge on a roadway and important habitat area later this morning. Next slide now, please. This is, okay, we can go on to the pie chart. This is a quick look of what I've just mentioned in terms of funding by category. We'll make this available on our financial assistance webpage, so you'll be able to take a longer look at it later. As I mentioned, eligible applicants are coastal municipalities, coastal communities in the UT, and regional planning organizations. To receive funds, a community must have a current comprehensive plan finding of consistency with the Growth Management Act that's issued by our program, either while we've been at DACF or at the former state planning office. We are continuing to look for projects which are regional in scope. And in the case of multi-municipal applications, at least one of the participating municipalities must have a current consistency finding. There's a lot to comprehend just now, and I'd be happy to follow up with you after the workshop to talk about whether you have a current consistency finding, as well as to talk to you about comprehensive plans. Next slide, please. Okay, oops, sorry. What eligible applicants? Sorry. Fang, I think you could turn to the next slide. Thanks. This is what the case studies look like. They're prepared by grantees when they finish up the project, and they're presented in their own words. It's no fluff involved, no polishing. They're telling you like it is, and they're telling you about the lessons they've learned. So the grant program statement for this program is issued annually in advance of the NOAA funding we receive, which becomes available July 1st. We do our best to release it in late February so you can make it in time for town meeting in March, with proposals due in April. And we work hard to get all the grant awards made and encumbered so that work can start August 1st of the same year. In the past few grant rounds, we have offered the opportunity for grants of up to $100,000, but we still have had no takers. The minimum ask is $15,000, which a lot of times can help. And I must add that who can beat a match of beat a minimum 25% match requirement, which can be a combination of in-kind match, including admin time by municipal staff, and cash match. The workshop organizers have asked me to speak about admin requirements, but I'm going to leave that to you taking a look at the grant program statement and then following up with me on questions, because it's not that complicated and it's pretty straightforward.
Rita, you have about 2 minutes left.
Okay, well, here we go. The next set of slides covers the 6 scoring criteria for grant proposals. This part of the presentation is short and sweet, and if we do run out of time, there's plenty on these next slides that you can refer to later, or I can come back at another workshop, get fit in. Okay, let's start with the first one. The place to start in writing a successful proposal is don't assume we know what you're talking about, and write in plain English. Don't use jargon, because we're not all technical experts. We rely on other people to give us technical advice. Use the template you see here, which is in the grant program statement. That will guide you to be able to tell us what the project will do, who will do it, and how it'll be implemented. And thanks to Wendy Garland and 319, because that's their template that we borrowed. Next slide, please. Okay, I want to note, as it's on the bottom, projects without cash match can't score the full number of points here. And as we read through the proposals, we're looking to what degree does the project represent a good return for the investment of time and money, including what could possibly be transferable, whether it's a tool or a new idea for what you're proposing in the project. Next, please. Okay, so this is very important. This is where you need to demonstrate you have the necessary technical expertise, knowledge, project management, and administrative capacity to complete the project and to manage the consultant or project team and report on the proposed project. It's not just about financial management and, you know, being able to submit invoices. Sorry, but I have put it to you that way. Next slide, please. And this one is pretty straightforward, what you need to do. I have nothing to embellish. Next, please. Okay, believe it or not, this is the most overlooked thing in proposals. And you betcha it's going to be even more critical as we move forward in awarding funds. And it's worth a whole 10 points, okay? It's a tough one. I don't have anything to add right now because we'd have to talk one-on-one about it as you talk about what your proposal is. Next, please. This is the last in the list of scoring criteria, but I look at this as the place to start when you develop proposals. You need partners, and applications need to show a strong level of local support. This can be accomplished even getting a letter from the select board, not just from the town administrator, showing support. It goes a long way. And we've had times when we've received support letters from local businesses and neighbors. That's been helpful. Next slide is it. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you a little bit too fast and a little bit over time, but I wanted to share what we've learned along the way, and you are all an important part of it. We're very fortunate that we have some flexibility in this program to continue to evolve. Very, very, very fortunate to do so. And that it sits within our program, which also gives us more flexibility than some of the other grant programs you'll be hearing about. Call me and and call Tom Mariolo. We're a team of two and we both work on this together, but I'm the lead. Okay, thank you.
That's great, Ruta. Thank you so much. Our next speaker will be Matt Burns from the Maine DOT. He'll talk about the Small Harbor Improvement Program, which is also called SHIP, and the Boating and Improvement Grant, which is called BIG. So, Matt, take it away.
All right, thank you very much. Happy to be here with everybody today and to meet some new faces. So, thanks for having me. I'm Matt Burns. I work with the Maine Department of Transportation. I run the Ports and Marine program. So that is everything from our 3 major industrial seaports in the state to all the small and medium-sized ports and harbors in the middle. Like it was already said, I run the Ship and Big program, 2 very popular programs that we have with the DOT, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Next slide. So I'll first start off by talking about the SHIP program. The SHIP program uses all state funds. The bonds come from, the funds come from transportation bonds, multimodal transportation funding, and also the cash match provided by the applicant. The program originated in '95. We've done a ton of projects. Like I said, it's been very popular. And we're focused on, coastal tidewater communities and municipalities with this program. So we don't offer this program to private businesses or marinas. Next slide. So basically, the program's designed for communities that want to make investments in their waterfront infrastructure. So, public wharves, landings, boat ramps, floating docks, all that kind of stuff. Is in our bailiwick for the program. We really try to focus our investments on working waterfront type applications. So fishing, lobstering, that sort of stuff is really the bread and butter of the program. Next slide. So for our program, it's a 50-50 cash match. So 50% comes from the municipality, 50% comes from the DOT. And there's a $250,000 funding cap for a single application. There's no limit to how many times you can apply. So if you want to apply for, for instance, if you have a phased project, you can apply for funding for, your first phase in 1 year, and then apply for another grant in another year, further out. So really, it's good to identify kind of what you're looking to do well ahead of time so that we can kind of try and plan for when the best years, to apply for funding would be. In 2021, we have projects that are going to be in Bangor, Long Island, Machias, and also Harpswell. And the application period is rolling throughout the year. So you can send me an application or a letter of intent anytime. There's really no deadline, but the only thing that I will say is usually around late August and September of every year, we do our transportation work plan. So for the next work plan, we'll be going for years 21, 22, and 23. So really, if you can get an application in before September, that's your best chance of getting a project put into the work plan. We do prioritize by need. So, if it's possible to accelerate your project to a year sooner because, you really have a big need or your facility's falling apart, it's something that we can work with you on. So we're very flexible, and that's one of the things that I think is really advantageous about the program is that we can shift things around based on your need. Next. So yeah, as far as the application, I'll just kind of touch on it. The application is really very similar, or simple. I'm sorry. It's not anything that's really too complicated, but we really want to emphasize, purpose and need. who are the users of the facility, who does it benefit, and what are the economic impacts. That's really what we try to focus in on. Kind of similar to like what Ruta said, partnerships are a big, big part of the program. So letters of support from businesses, adjacent property owners, city and state officials. I mean, that kind of stuff goes a long way to kind of telling the story for what you're trying to do. As far as the process is concerned, usually what happens is, you could start off by making a phone call to me. Next thing, you would submit a letter of intent, and then usually we would schedule a site visit shortly after I received the letter of intent. And anyway, we're queued out to about 2023 for new projects. So that doesn't mean that pockets of funding become available at some point earlier than that. But the bottom line is to get your application in and kind of get your spot in line so that we can start working with you on trying to fund your project. Next slide. Just a little bit about kind of how we're changing things. I've been with the DOT for the last 3 years. Before that, the programs had kind of changed hands amongst a few individuals who are no longer with the DOT. So I found that when I got there, I really wanted to get the word out and emphasize that like we are doing a calling for all projects, and really try and encourage towns to apply. So that's a big part of what I do is try and get out, meet with towns, meet with folks that are interested in these programs, and just talk about it. A big part of what we do every year is at the Harbor Masters Association meetings, usually I think in March of every year, and I do a presentation there, and that's a really great way to get the word out to the folks at the town waterfronts, who are kind of running the show down there, and just discuss things with them and tell them how things are changing or what they need to know to make a successful application. And one of the things I just wanted to say is it's kind of a work in progress. So our application isn't very complicated, but I think that it's always something that you can try and strive to make better. Get feedback from folks who've applied through the program, and just make tweaks to it to make sure that we're getting all the information we need to determine if it's a good fit for the program, and if it's a good fit for the town to invest their money in one of these projects. So the other thing that I'm trying to do is just make sure that we get one of our engineers involved from the start, because sometimes that's helpful to get some independent feedback about what you're looking to do from an engineering perspective, and also working into the local project administration guidelines that we have with the DOT, which is how we run a lot of these projects. And I can touch on more of that later. I think that, for some towns, it can be a little overwhelming for, how to manage like a bidding process publicly and, doing things the way that we ask them to be done through the DOT. So just trying to work with them as much as possible to help them through that is something that we always strive to do. Next slide. Okay, so that kind of is the SHIP program. Like I said, all state funds, we just work with municipalities through that. Now I'm going to talk about the boating infrastructure grant program, which is a completely different animal because it utilizes all federal funds. And we have a federal partner in the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So essentially, just to kind of explain how this works, the DOT is the grantee for any big grants, and then we sub-grant to the applicant that's been awarded. So for instance, if you're a marina that's applied for funding, all of the money kind of passes through the DOT, and then the DOT does the reimbursements for the invoices as they come up throughout construction. Like I said, it's a partnership between Fish and Wildlife and Maine DOT. And the purpose of the program is to construct, renovate, and maintain facilities for transient boaters 26 feet or greater in length. So they're very specific about who the program applies for. So if your facility does not host or have transient boaters, of that size vessel, then it's really not going to be a good fit for the program. Applicants can apply for up to $1.5 million. There's a little bit of nuance to that, which I'll explain here in a minute. And the match is 25%. So it's 25% local match, 75% federal. The grant cycles run yearly, and the deadline for this current cycle that we're in, which is fiscal year 21, ends September 14th. So anyway, I'll get into this on the next slide. Please.
Matt, you have a couple of more minutes.
Okay. There's tier 1 and tier 2 grants. Tier 1 grants, it's still 75% federal share, but we get about $200,000 to distribute amongst eligible projects throughout the state. Tier 2 is nationally competitive, same split of funding, but you can apply for up to $1.5 million. The only catch is you throw your application into the ring with all the other applicants from the country. Next slide. This is just a description of the types of projects that BIG funds. I won't read through the whole list, but if you have any questions about that, you can always email me or give me a call, after the presentation. Next. In FY20, the last cycle, we awarded 2 projects. One was a tier 2 project at the Great Island Boatyard in Harpswell, and the other one was the 4 Points Marina in Portland, which received a tier 1 grant. Next slide. And just to get a little bit into, the requirements for the applications, this is all contained in the notice of funding opportunity, but it's fairly standard for a federal grant. Next slide. Everything has to be submitted to the DOT in your application package. Then the DOT submits the grant on behalf of the applicant to Fish and Wildlife. So, usually it's always something I say, get your application in as early as possible, because we can do an initial review and give you any sort of feedback prior to the actual deadline. And Fish and Wildlife always works with us on that as well, which is really nice. Next slide. The NOFO is usually released sometime in the late spring, early summer. And, like I said, deadline's usually in mid-September, although we like to have an internal deadline to the DOT a couple weeks prior to that. And if you're looking to, get some ideas or read more about what the NOFO has in it, you can always get in touch with me, and I'm happy to email you even a previous year's NOFO so you can get an idea of what's involved. Next slide. Just, an example of one of our projects. This is a concept drawing for the 58 4th Street Marina in Portland. And then the next slide shows where the rubber meets the road here and the actual construction of that. So it's been a really successful project, and we're very proud of that. So next slide. Here's some contact info, information about SHIP and BIG grants. All of our application materials are on the DOT website in the link provided. And if you have any questions at all, feel free to call me anytime. It's my email and my phone number here. And please reach out and we can talk through that further. Next slide. I also mentioned the Maine DOT locally administered project or local project administration program. We do trainings on how that program operates. That's actually, I think that actually was postponed. I meant to update that, but I think the next training is sometime in September. So that's also on the local project administration website for the DOT as well. You can get information or give a call if you have questions.
Great, thanks, Matt.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. Our next speaker is Wendy Garland from Maine DEP. She'll be talking about watershed planning and the implementation grant program. We are just a little bit behind, but no worries. I don't want to take away from speakers. If you have questions, maybe type them into the chat box so that if we don't get to them, we will answer them after the workshop. So go ahead, Wendy, you're up. Thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone. I'm Wendy Garland. I work for Maine DEP in our Bureau of Water Quality, and I coordinate our MPS program coordinator, which I will tell you what that means in just a sec. Next slide. I'm going to talk today about our 2 different grant programs that we run through our non-point source program. But first, a little bit of background around sort of the goals of our program, and the goal of our work is in our Water Quality Bureau, we carry out many of the pieces of the Clean Water Act, federal Clean Water Act, and state laws, and with the intent, and our goal is to keep Maine's waters, or help make them become fishable, swimmable, and drinkable after treatment. Next slide. We are really lucky in Maine in that we have so many clean waters in the state that attain the water quality standards that we've put forth for them. A much smaller number are non-attaining or impaired that don't meet water quality standards. Our program deals with both of those, keeping our clean waters clean and helping restore many of our impaired waters. Next slide. So our program, the MPS that I was talking about, really is focused on, some of our impaired waters or threatened waters are, they're dealing with the pollutant sources are called point source pollution. That's sort of associated with wastewater treatment plant discharges or industrial discharges or combined sewer overflows. Our program deals with the rest of what's, the threats and impairing Maine's waters. And that could be a whole variety of pollutants. Here are just a few that are shown. It could be road salt from winter road maintenance, nutrients and bacteria from pet waste or manure, nutrients from fertilizers, and also attached to sediment or waste, and then sediment itself. Those are all problems that we try to address through our program. Next slide. So given all the waters of the state and also our limited resources, the way we focus our program in on the most important priorities is we create a non-point source priority watersheds list. And this map is kind of a work in progress. We're moving it to an ArcGIS online project in the coming month or two, where people can search graphically to see what waters are priority waters in the areas that you serve or the towns where you live. There's also the link at the top, brings you to a tabular list of the lakes, streams, and coastal waters that are priorities, either because they're impaired because of non-point source pollution or polluted runoff, or because they're particularly threatened by this source of pollution. So you can click again. There's one more piece to this. So in these places, in these water bodies throughout the state, we guide people through our program and our grants to work on a watershed scale to address the problems or the threats to your water bodies. This just shows a map of the watershed of Chartbrook and South Portland and Cape Elizabeth, where we've done work over the past several years. Next slide. So our program and our grants program is structured to sort of steer people to first do planning and then to implement those plans. And so we have two different grant programs, and I'll go through each of those now. Next slide. So planning grants, really, it's designed to create a plan that will guide restoration or protection efforts. One important thing, planning is a great thing to do, but it's also a requirement to have a plan that meets EPA guidelines. This funding is through EPA's Clean Water Act, either Section 604B or 319. And before we do work fixing a watershed, a plan is required. So, there are certain steps if it's impaired water or marine water or a stream, you need this 9-element plan, which is a bit more complex. We walk people through a process kind of that they can do independently. If you're working in a lake watershed where it's not impaired, it's a little bit more straightforward. So we have a streamlined planning process that's separate from our grants process. But so that's our planning grants. Next slide. Typical elements of planning grants include water quality monitoring. If people need to collect more data to get a better handle on what are the problems with our stream or lake and where are they occurring. There could be watershed or stream assessments, habitat assessments. They typically involve stakeholder outreach and engagement, public forums, things like that to get people involved and crafting a plan. They include, a project would include time to write the plan and administer the project. And that, I guess I would just forgot to mention, that would include, usually projects for both types of grants would include semi-annual progress reports and a final project report, along with any other project-specific deliverables that, there's usually four to six deliverables altogether. One thing to note, given the focus of our workshop today, is that in this last grant cycle, we've also let applicants know that their plans need to consider climate impacts and strategies to address those in their plan. Next slide. So eligible applicants could be any public planning agencies for this type of grant, the planning ones. It could be towns, soil and water conservation districts, regional planning commissions. Important to note that it can't be 501c3 nonprofits, but oftentimes we have partners where maybe the applicant would be a soil and water conservation district or a town, but they have a sub-grant through their project to the local NGO that's really invested in doing the work as well. The funding, we're really bottlenecked in our program with limited funding for planning, unfortunately, because it's a requirement of our other grant program. We've typically had about $50,000 available each year, sometimes a little bit more if we can scrape it together. That usually funds 1 to 3 grants per year, ranging from $10,000 to $50,000. A $10,000 project might be something that's pretty straightforward and a well understood watershed and water quality, and they just need to assemble a plan, whereas an urban impaired stream where there's just a lot going on might be a much more involved planning process. There's a 25% local match requirement that can be in kind or cash, any combination of that. Okay, next slide. The timeline for both of our grants is about the same, where we release the request for applications in the spring and March. For the planning grants, they're due about 5 weeks later in April, and they're due in April, and then we make our conditional award notifications in early June for startup in October. And those projects last 2 years. Next slide. So next are watershed implementation grants. That's once you have a plan done, either if you funded it locally and it meets our requirements, or you went through a grant. Could be our grant, it could have been a coastal community grant. RUDA's program has funded projects that have developed grants that meet our needs as well. Then you're able to get in the door and apply for implementation grants. So that would be, you could apply for funds over, I think similar to Matt, you could come back, apply this year and carry out that project for a few years, and then come back after that's done to carry out the next pieces of your plan. So some groups are, at it for a while. I think Spruce Creek and Kittery is on their 5th phase project right now, still working in their watershed. Next slide. These projects have a heavy emphasis on installing best management practices in the watershed. That might include a lot of road work in the lake watershed, replacing undersized culverts that are, eroding into the stream and lake. It could, lots of, in an urban setting, include stormwater BMP installations or retrofits. It could be technical assistance, ordinance development. There's usually an outreach and education task to involve the public and raise awareness about the issues. And then as well as project management, similar to what I mentioned earlier. I'll just mention one thing that some project, even if it's important for your watershed and water quality to do X, Y, and Z, not all of the items that might be in a plan would be eligible for the funding through Section 319, which we're not funding septic system replacements, for example, or funding something that's already required or there's enforcement action under. But typically, a lot of the things that we have in our plans are eligible. Next slide. Applicants that are eligible, same as for planning grants, except 501c3 nonprofits can apply for our implementation grants. We typically have about $900,000 available each year through this RFP process, which can fund 8 to 12 grants, depending on, the size of the grant. They range from $50,000 to $120,000, I would say. Maybe an average is $100,000. We don't have a cap on it, but really, people are can be limited by their match that they can come up with. And we have a 40% match requirement. Again, that could be cash or in-kind labor. Next. Similar timeline, just delayed by a month or so when the request for applications comes out in April. Proposals are due a little bit later. We give people a little more time because they're a little bit more involved. Award decisions are in July, and then the project funds usually don't kick in until January. There's a little bit of a lag, but those projects usually go 2 years. Sometimes they have an ability to be extended into a third field season. Next slide. So scoring criteria, how am I doing on time? Oh. So we have on our web page, which is the first hyperlink below, lists the scoring criteria for our the applications we receive. Some of the same things that Ruta mentioned. We want to make sure there's a strong team in place that can carry out the work. We want to, you get points if the water body has high value to more than just, if there's public access to it, or a shellfish, an economic importance, or a beach that it's protecting that's highly used by tourists and residents. And then high points for half of the points go to feasibility for success, which kind of factors in partners and the contributions from other entities, cost effectiveness. So those are all pretty well laid out. I'll just note that a couple of things that don't make for a strong proposal would be if, I know many of you perhaps are looking how to fix this one or a handful of undersized culverts in your town or some infrastructure. Those single kind of projects would not be a good fit with this program. We want people to be looking more comprehensively at their watershed. So you'd be kind of looking at all the issues and have a phased approach over time to tackle them all. And we have resources listed below. The grants webpage will bring you to the Division of Procurement Services for the state, where kind of you can see our past grant application. We have examples of past applications on our webpage as well. And then our annual reports include, like on the graphic on the right, the two-page summaries of completed grant projects. So you can get a flavor for kind of the types of projects we fund and the scale and scope of those projects. And I'll just finish by saying it's really, I would really encourage you, next slide, to reach out to either myself or projects staff around the state. We have people stationed in each of our regional offices that can help walk you through sort of thinking about how to approach a proposal, and we help people all the way up until the applications come out. At that point, we have to be kind of hands off for that month or so, but we really like to work with people to figure out if they have a good proposal and how to make it a strong one. All right.
Great, thank you, Wendy. And last and definitely not least is John McLean from Maine DEP talking about the Municipal Stream Crossing Grant Program. So take it away, John.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm John McLean, and I'm the administrator of the Stream Crossing Grants Program, and also the coordinator of DEP's Non-Point Source Training Center. So we offer grants to municipalities and other qualifying organizations for improvements to public infrastructure stream crossings on municipal roads to improve public safety, reduce flooding, help protect budgets from costly replacements and ongoing maintenance costs for both tidal and inland streams. And then finally, it's also to improve fish and wildlife habitat by reconnecting streams fragmented by undersized, deteriorating, or hanging culverts. Next slide, please. So we've offered similar grants since 2015, although the 2019 and 2020 rounds now come from the transportation bond. And the requirements are a little bit more specific than the earlier grants that were offered. To this point, we've granted approximately $10 million to over 130 local stream crossings through the program through the end of last year. And for this year, we have $5 million available in grants, which is actually the most we've ever had for an available for a single round. So we're really hoping to be able to fund a lot of projects this year. And so this is a competitive program, and the scoring is based on how well the project meets the program's goals as outlined in the law that authorizes this program. Sorry, you can go back one. Yeah. And so for this round, we've increased the maximum award to $125,000 per project. We have a limit of 8% on the award amount that can be used towards engineering services. However, we do now have an option to pay some of those engineering costs up front if they're requested. A couple other important things to note would be that there is no minimum match requirement for the grant to be considered. And, but we can't fund 100% of any single project. So there has to be some amount of match from other sources, and the amount of that match will potentially affect the scoring in the cost section. So our previous grants had a maximum award of $95,000, and as prices have increased, that led to the need. It's led to the need for a lot of municipalities to pull together a lot of different partners on projects for funding and technical support because of the complexity of the grant program has increased as the requirements have gotten more specific. We certainly encourage applicants to reach out to local inland fisheries and wildlife fisheries biologists and their environmental review staff, Marine Resources Sea Run Fisheries Program, Audubon Stream Smart Program, and other available resources that we have through our grant program. For funding, it can be a little bit trickier, but we have seen grant-funded projects bolstered with funding and technical partnerships from other groups such as U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, EPA 319 grant program, Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, FEMA funding, and then also Trout Unlimited and other non-governmental organizations. And then we've also seen some cross-community partnering especially where stream crossings fall on town lines. With stream crossings, there are a lot of potential connections to other important initiatives regarding public safety, transportation, local and regional connectivity efforts, fish passage initiatives and advocacy organizations, water quality, and also resiliency efforts. So next slide. To apply for our program, you have to qualify, and firstly, to qualify, the project must be located on a municipal road, so it can't be a state or private road. And eligible project sponsors include local governments, municipal conservation commissions, soil and water conservation districts, private nonprofit organizations. So we've also found that state aid roads do not count as municipal roads for this program. And so if you're selected for a grant award, you'll end up entering into a contract with DEP to provide funding on a reimbursement basis for the costs incurred related to the stream crossing, unless hardship payment is needed, and there are some special conditions that apply there. That also accepts the 8% of the award that can go towards engineering, which can be requested once the contract is signed to get started on the project. Next slide. So essentially, we've boiled down the goals of the grant program to 3 categories. The first is that it reduces flooding and improves public safety, and that accounts for 25% of the score in the program. The second thing is that it advances the restoration goals for fish and wildlife, and that's 50% of the grant scoring. And then thirdly, the project represents an efficient and cost-effective investment, which is 25% of the score. These are the major scoring categories that we use in our grant review team to determine a consensus numerical score for each project. The scores are ranked highest to lowest, and funding's provided in the order of the rank until the money runs out for that round. The program scoring is administered using the transportation bond funding and is very specific as to what we need to look at. We actually just produced an online grants workshop specific to this grant that goes into a lot more detail than we have time to go into here. It's about a 2-hour webinar that's available at any time. So I hope you check that out. That's available on our grants webpage, and I'll share a link to that a little bit later in the presentation. We look at things that advance these 3 primary goals, such as the presence and restoration priority for brook trout, sea run fish, including Atlantic salmon and alewives, the extent to which the proposed project meets a design standard of at least 1.2 times the stream's bank full width. It provides fish and wildlife passage. It meets or exceeds the Department of Transportation's 100-year flood standard and will reduce flooding and failure potential. So structures with a high risk of failure and previous failure events, high ongoing maintenance costs, and projects with a higher anticipated lifespan that's being proposed will likely result in a higher score for those respective sections. The same can be said for projects further along in the design process, but engineered designs are not required to apply for funding. So I would certainly highly recommend anyone interested in taking advantage of the grant funds that we have this year to take a look at our informational workshop, which is available right now. Goes into a lot of detail about each of the sections that we're tasked with looking at, and certainly increases the chances of success, and has, these workshops in general have really improved the quality of the applications coming into the program. Next slide.
A couple more minutes, John.
Okay. For our grants, the application materials are available during the RFP period, which is coming up, going to be open on September 1st. We anticipate the applications will close in mid-November, and it's really important to get the submissions in by the deadline listed in the RFP, because we're not sent any of the applications sent after that, or received after that time period. There's a number of resources in the online workshop that you can use while you're preparing your application. You can also find information on the current round at this website, as well as scoring and applications from previous rounds, which can give you an idea of what to expect this year. The application does change each round, but there's enough similarity that it can really give you a chance to start now. So next slide. So to make the best of your proposal, keep a few things in mind. Make sure you read and follow the instructions in the RFP. It ends up costing people points sometimes when they don't follow the instructions based on what we need to review it. Be concise and make sure you answer all the questions as fully as possible in the application. We do ask for a lot, but we use each question for some piece of the scoring. So if you don't answer a question, that can really hurt you and be the difference between being awarded and not awarded a project. We also have a lot of online resources like Stream Stats, the Maine Stream Habitat Viewer, beginning with habitat maps, resource agency biologists from Inland Fisheries, Wildlife, and DMR who are prepared and ready to help folks out with these projects. Also do the basic field work that's required for the grant program. That will really help you adequately size your structures and begin design, but also will give us greater confidence that the design sizing is correct for that site. For inland crossings, use stream smart practices to make sure the structure is at least 1.2 times the bankful width of the stream. And for tidal and inland crossings, make sure that there's a natural bottom embedded in backfilled structure and banks within the structure for terrestrial passage. There are resources for tidal crossings, including the Maine Coastal Program. So I hope that you reach out to some of those folks to make sure that you're appropriately sizing and taking tidal taking the right considerations when you're doing tidal crossings. Okay, next slide. And so we'll continue to update our website. The webinar is available on this link here, which I'll probably throw the link in the chat as well. You'll find the resources I mentioned on this page, including previous grants, a link to the actual page, the procurement services page where the grant will be posted once it's available on September 1st. And we do anticipate future rounds of this funding. And there is funding that's set aside for 2021. We do anticipate a similar time frame, depending on how the timing works out with this current year's funding. So look for that next year. Other than that, it's not guaranteed because it's based on what's included in the transportation bond right now. So you know, that additional years of funding is potentially up in the air. So next slide. And so once again, thanks everybody. My name's John McLean, and I think we have some time for some questions now.
Yep, John, a question came through for you. Okay. Do you recommend a 10%, 20%, 40% match for your grants?
Yeah, I mean, the more match that's included, the higher the score will be in that cost effectiveness section of the grant. But it's hard to say because each town is going to be a little bit different. The scope and scale of each project is going to be a little bit different. So we do try and take into account the size of the project and the size of the match in addition to the percent. So it really depends on what the municipality has available to them, and if they can, I guess, put more skin in the game in a way that's one way to potentially increase your score in the cost effectiveness section.
Great, thank you. I did get a question in for Matt. Matt, does your agency give recommendations for specific projects that you deem viable or necessary? So do you have any recommendations for specific projects?
I mean, you know, everything is, I don't have any recommendations per se. You know, I mean, what I would say is, you know, that like as far as the SHIP program is concerned, you know, it only funds construction projects. So if you're looking to apply and you have something that you're looking to build or construct, you know, having your project permitted, you know, near full design and all your match in place is really, you know, an important part of it. But as far as like what types of projects, I mean, you know, piers, wharves, floating docks, boat ramps, I mean, you know, that sort of stuff is really, you know, the kind of mainstay of what we do with SHIP, you know. And, you know, I think, you know, we do things that are a little unusual from time to time. Like, you know, we're working on the Booth Bay Footbridge project right now, which, you know, isn't really something that, you know, we might consider, but there is actually public boat access off of the footbridge. So that was kind of like a, you know, that kind of sealed the deal for us to want to work with the town on that and move forward with that project. So everything's a little different. I think, you know, just getting out there, talking to the town and, you know, making the site visit to really see what the potential of the project is where we make that determination.
Great, thank you. We did have a question for Wendy that she answered in the chat box. It's an important question. Why don't you fund 501c3 entities? And Wendy, should I just read your response so everybody just hears it? It's just easier if I just read. Your response was, our watershed planning grants are funded primarily through Section 604B of the Clean Water Act, which restricts funding to public planning entities. So unfortunately, nonprofits are not eligible to apply, but nonprofit 501c3 organization can apply for the 319 implementation grant funding. And if you want to add anything to that, Wendy?
No, I think that covers it. I would just encourage towns, given kind of some of the breakout discussion, I think it would be, I would encourage towns to work with soil and water conservation districts or NGOs to pursue projects. They often have sort of familiarity with our grant program and expertise in this area, so it might save the town the headache of having to learn all about the ins and outs of it.
Great, thank you, Wendy. Another question for Matt. Matt, are parking lot improvements of harbors, have they been done before?
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's actually a pretty popular, part of, some of the projects we do. That seems to be a limiting factor with a lot of facilities, is just that there isn't enough places to park or enough room for trucks to be able to maneuver. And yeah, we definitely do that kind of work for sure.
Great, thank you. We are just about out of time, maybe have time for one more question if anybody's got one. I can't see all the boxes, so help me out here if you've got a question. Go ahead.
Note that I put the Stream Crossing Grant website in the chat. And similar to Wendy, I can answer questions up until it's released, and then everything will have to be in writing.
Great. Is there anyone else? Just speak up because I can't see raised hands of everybody. Okay, so great. We're back on time, ready for the next session, which is we're going to be hearing some stories, some success stories from communities. So let's go right into that section without any delay.
Yep. Thanks, Martha. Just a quick note that we have 3 speakers who have worked with either one or more than one of the grant programs that have been discussed today. Each presentation will be 10 minutes, and after all 3 of them, we'll have hopefully 15 minutes for Q&A, but as before, you can put any questions down in the chat box or you can jot them down. So the 3 presenters are Marianne Naif from Harpswell Conservation Commission. She'll be speaking about the Basin Point Road Coastal Flooding and Community Engagement Project. Leidy Whittier Robbins from 30 Mile River Watershed Association, talking about a Sandy River Road project up in Chesterville. And then closing out, last but certainly not least, Christina Therian, town manager from the town of Machias, and she'll be talking about a waterfront renewal and resilience study. So Marianne, you can start us off, and all these presenters will basically have images to illustrate their projects. So if you could just let Peng know when you want her to advance the slides. All yours, Marianne.
Okay, great. Hello, everybody. My name is Marianne Naif, and I am chair of the Harpswell Conservation Commission. When I was asked to speak about this project, it was a very important one for our town, and was happy to do so. I did want to mention that I looked at the agenda at the members that are here today, and most of them work for town government. The Conservation Commission in Harpswell is a volunteer committee. We are accepted by the town of Selectmen for a 3-year term, but we do act as volunteers. And as I listened to many of the comments this morning, I realized while I thought that was a disadvantage, it has given us an advantage in some cases. I'd like to just go back for a little bit of background. In 2015, we had our first public workshop with the citizens to introduce them to sea level rise and climate resilience. And we had Peter Slavinsky come down and from Maine GIS to talk a little bit about what was happening and what to expect. And at the same meeting, we had an interactive map where the attendees were able to look at their home, their address, or other parts of town to just see how it would look with the various levels of sea level rise. After our breakout session, it was kind of an overwhelming consensus of the attendees that we needed to really look at roads. That was very important. They felt it was important. Next slide, please. Now, one of the reasons, if I don't know if you're familiar with Harpsville, we are a coastal community, that of two peninsulas that has really three main backbones, which are state roads, and numerous public and private roads off of that. We realized, and we looked at the chart, that we were going to have 8 of our public roads affected by just 2 feet of sea level rise and storm surge. Some of them, depending on winds, are already affected depending on tides and storm at the same time. The thing is, though, our town roads and the state road together is only, they're each about 14% of the total. Actually, 68% of our roads are private. So that sort of put a little different spin on not only do we have to think about the town roads, but we also need to come up and teach the people on private roads just how they're going to deal with this as well. So it was a bit of a two-pronged situation. We addressed the private road owners first by talking to them about statutory road associations and telling how they might prepare for the future because they were going to have to pay for this themselves. So then when we had the opportunity to apply for the coastal grant, we looked around to see which of the roads we should think about. And would you have the next slide, please? And we chose Basin Point Road for a number of reasons. First of all, it's the longest of the public roads in town that are owned by the town. And it has heavy seasonal traffic because one of the town's largest business, the Dolphin Marina, is at the end. And between the restaurant and the boat yard itself, they have over 35 employees. And it only has one way in and one way out. So you can see the chokehold right up at the head of Basin Cove. And if that were to not be accessible, everything past that is not accessible by land. So this made it, we thought, a really good project because it sort of had all the points that any of the other roads had in town. Some of the others had more than one access, this did not. So along with this, as we wrote up the grant, we realized that it also had an adjoining wetland to its right off the culvert, and also which was fresh water. That enabled us to speak with the Harpsville Heritage Land Trust, who owned that property. It was the Curtis Farm Preserve, to become a partner because they, as well as we, were interested in what would happen as more and more salt water intruded into the wetland marsh. So that enabled us to partner also, well, actually work with the Casco Bay Estuary Partnership to do an ecological study as part of the grant. So we ended up with two entities, Goral Palmer Engineering, to engineer what it would cost and the feasibility of raising the road for 3-foot and a 6-foot rise. And the Casco Bay Estuary Partnership with Matt Craig did the ecological assessment. So we have an idea also of what's going to happen as this slowly converts. Because you can see that the green is 6 feet and it does become disconnected at that point. So what we realized for, what we ended up with actually is in the results was we had this feasibility study that gave us good information. A couple of things. We looked at 3 and 6 feet. We also looked at doing nothing, and we found out that doing nothing has a cost as well. It was going to cost approximately $691,000 to raise the road 3 feet, and then about to go 6 feet, it was going to cost in approximately $1,370,000. Two of the scenarios seem to be what we could put our hands around at this time. We learned that doing nothing had a cost because the lifespan of the road is going to deteriorate. It already has a roadbed of between 15 and 18 inches, and that is already becoming saturated on some of the king tides. As more and more of the roadbed becomes saturated, it also affects the integrity of the road. So we knew that it was going to have a cost to maintenance, and it was going to have a cost to the age and how the road was going to hold up. We had the cost for 3 feet. When it got to 6 feet, we realized that when we have 6 feet of rise, we're going to have many, many issues throughout town. And while we know the cost, it was not something that we were going to concern ourselves with now. We had a public meeting when this report came out, and everybody kind of was shaking their heads, wondering how a town of 5,000 people was going to pay for these 8 roads, let alone some of the other issues. So actually, the study also gave us, it gave us kind of the idea of next steps, because we knew now what it was going to cost for one road. We knew that what we were going to need in addition to find out about the other roads. And it also told us that we probably should be looking at more than roads and the other big infrastructure in town would be town landings and boat yards. So with that, move on to another, I'll go to the next slide. While we were in the process of the grant, we also realized that its citizen involvement was really, really important to keep up the interest and promote that with the town selectmen. We did have the opportunity to start taking pictures, and Casco Bay Estuary Partnership had a grant at the time, the Casco Bay Community Grant, which allowed us to put up picture posts at the 8 locations in town that are noted to be flooding periodically. That project has citizen scientists who can take pictures at any time, where it gives us the advantage of having record shots if we need it later, if we're looking for a grant for that particular area to make some changes. And it keeps the citizens involved. We have stewards that take pictures. We have them do approximately 1 in each season and 2 extra in the winter at the king tides. So, so just wanted to mention that was just one of the areas that came out of the grant. It just was an opportunity that presented itself right while we were doing that. So just to wrap up a little bit, we go on to the last slide. We did learn the value of a comprehensive approach. We've learned the value of the citizens themselves having input and having their interest. That brings up the importance to the Board of Selectmen. And I can say that last year was the first year that the selectmen did added to their goals and objection to consider and keep working on climate resiliency and sea level rise. This was a big plus that finally happened. And as I mentioned earlier, the pilot study put dollars on 1 road, and we knew we have 8 at risk. And how are we going to be in thinking of how are we going to handle that? And we also learned to go back again, a little bit of a review to think about roadbed as well as road surface. And it seems that with every step we learn a little bit more that we should be thinking about when it comes to roads themselves. It's not just the top, and it's the roadbed. It's also how high you can, how it's going to affect the surrounding area. And we also now have started to think about more than roads. We're in the process of completing the climate resiliency checklist, which is enabled us to look at not only the landings and boat launches, but we're also able to look at some of the social issues of how this is all going to affect our senior citizens, of which we have a very high percentage, and just how well is our emergency management system coordinating with what we're thinking about. And we found out that they're doing very well, especially with COVID. We had the opportunity to just see how they were able to jump into action and how quickly. So all in all, the process has given us the impetus, I think, to keep moving forward and see what we're going to really have to do. Well,
thank you. Thank you, Marianne. May I remind everyone, these were volunteers and volunteers that really rounded up various department staff and other committees to engage the community and get the work done. So very impressive. Thank you very much, Marianne. Now we'll move on to Leidy Whittier Robbins to talk about the Sandy River Road project in the town of Chesterville. So Leidy,
great.
Jump right in.
Great, thank you. The 30 Mile River Watershed Association is a 501c3 organization. We're a little different from the way other nonprofits are structured, in that we're a coalition of towns and lake associations. And I've got a map here showing you our watershed. So we're in central Maine. We're west of the Belgrade Lakes region. So the white area is the watershed that we work in. And our mission is working as a community for clean and healthy lakes and ponds in this whole watershed. We've been around since 2008. So I want to show you mostly just some images here of the project, and focus on some of the challenges and hurdles that we've had to overcome with this project, which is actually just starting this week to be implemented. So the crews might even be out there today. I haven't been out there to see it yet, so it's very timely. So this project is in between Parker Pond and David Pond. Parker Pond is on the DEP's threatened lakes list because of its sediment chemistry. And this project, if you can see where the red arrow is pointing to the crossing site. So it's at the outlet of David Pond, at the inlet of Parker Pond. Next slide, please. Got the next slide? Thank you. So this gives you an idea of the site. So it's in the town. Oops, back up, please. It's in the town of. Could you just back up to the previous slide, please? Thank you. It's in the town of Chesterville on. Not sure what's going on with the slides. They keep I don't know if I'm getting a delay or what's happening, but I wanted to be showing the image of the road. So a public road in the town of Chesterville. It's on an old mill site, a grist and sawmill that's over 200 years old. And so it's a narrow road built on not a very good foundation. It's a public road that gets a lot of use, and this picture doesn't really show so much the hills, but it's right here at this crossing. It's on both sides of the culvert are really steep and long hills that get lots of winter sand, and this has been really a chronic problem site for a long time. Next slide.
I think the delay might be on your end, Leidy.
Okay.
I'm not sure. I'm seeing the culvert. Are other people seeing it as well?
Okay, now you're seeing the culvert. Okay, sorry. Yeah, maybe the delay is on my end. Sorry about that. So this shows you the downstream part of the culvert. So it's a really undersized culvert. Again, a really weak foundation for the road, but a good site for culvert replacement for lots of reasons, which I think are pretty apparent here. The next one, please. So this next slide shows some of the old mill structure, which is also an issue for this particular site. So this is just downstream of the culvert, so lots of remnants of the former saw and grist mill. The next one, and these next slides, these next pictures show the upstream part of the site. So you get to see the mill pond, so it's no longer the stream that it should be, and then the mess that the culvert is. So the next slide shows some of the issues that the town has been having for many years with the road continually washing out. This picture is from 2014 with a DEP engineer standing in a sinkhole there on the road. And then the next slide shows both sides of the road and the deterioration and the erosion into the stream. So it's a safety hazard and for sure a big erosion problem. So the next one gives you an idea of a bit of the cause of some of the problems. Again, it's a very steep hill, and this is an image from a video that I took. I just happened to be out there a couple years ago when it started raining really hard, and you could, the water just washes right down the road and then goes directly into the stream that feeds into Parker Pond. So lots of muddy water there, silty water running down the road. The next one, and this next picture shows the conditions of the road this summer after just a couple of rainstorms. So continuing to deteriorate, and again, like water running right into the stream. And then just to leave you with this last image of a close-up here of the amount of water that's running into the stream. So that just gives you on the next slide, the last slide, please. Yeah, so there you go. So that the water is just washing away the road, continuing. Yeah, so that slide's not part of my presentation, so you can end the slides. That's what I had for pictures. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the challenges with this project. So this project has replacing the culverts here in this project and addressing the road has been funded in part by both 319 grant and a DEP stream crossing grant. And with this site, the two challenges that I've had to deal with are one is getting the town to support doing this work. It's the town of Chesterville, which is in Franklin County, is not a wealthy town, and it's not known really for prioritizing natural resource protection. It's not a very progressive town. It's of all the towns in our watershed that we work with, it's one of the more challenging ones and really limited in its funding. So that's the one challenge with Chesterville, and then another challenge is figuring out how to fund this rather large project. So this whole project goes way back to 2010 when I applied for a watershed survey grant, and this is back when the 319 program allowed you to apply for grants for that. So we did a watershed survey in 2011 that identified this as one of the biggest impact sites for Parker Pond. We then, the next 2 years later, applied for a 319 implementation grant and got that funding to do work from 2013 to 2015, but we weren't able to address this site because it was really just, it was too expensive. So it'd been on our radar, but we just couldn't figure out how to get it funded. So continued to keep that in our minds, to continue to work on it. And then when the Stream Crossing Grant program started up and I became more aware of it, was interested in that, and approached the town back in 2015 to apply for that grant. The town didn't have the capacity or the expertise to apply for the grant, so we were willing to do that for the town. But the town, we just couldn't get them fully on board. And one of our hurdles is that we needed to have some cash to put into an engineering plan to be able to apply for that grant. About $5,000 was all that we needed, but the town wasn't going to put $5,000 towards that preliminary engineering design. So that was a hurdle that we had to overcome. So we weren't able to apply for the grant in 2016 like we'd wanted to, but continued to continue to try to figure out how to make this work. And in the spring of 2018, we worked on a watershed-based plan for Parker Pond, and then applied for another 319 grant. So this would be our third one, our second implementation grant. And then also in 2018, we partnered with the Nature Conservancy, and the Nature Conservancy, at no cost to us, they did the preliminary engineering and design for this site. So we had what we needed to be able to apply for the Stream Crossing Grant. So we did that. So we applied for the Stream Crossing Grant in 2019 and were awarded in 2020, and had then enough funding between the 319 grant and the Stream Crossing Grant to be able to put towards this project, that the town was able to match the funding for it. Yeah, and actually I think I skipped over, so we the second, or no, maybe I did, the other DEP 319 implementation grant that we got. So we had enough funding to be able to put towards it. But we've had a lot of hurdles along the way, besides the funding, besides getting Chesterville really on board with the project. Just this year, COVID-19 messed everything up. When we had our town meeting, when the town funding was supposed to get approved, that was moved from March to June. And when our construction was scheduled to happen this summer, that really threw things off. We had a whole new select board to work with, and getting them up to speed took some time and some patience. Landowners at the final hour were throwing in issues around signing their easements. So it's been a lot of hurdles and a big test in persistence, but I would say that the lessons that we've learned, I mean, besides not to give up, because in the end, we were able to get it. Well, I shouldn't say that yet because it's not done yet, but it will hopefully be done, within most of the work, within a month, and then everything by the end of October. But having to be creative about the funding sources, and then really involving the partners. So we involved lots of partners along the way. Wendy Garland has been really helpful throughout this whole project. I mean, going way back to helping with the watershed survey back in 2011. So couldn't have done it without Wendy and other folks at the DEP, including John. The Parker Pond Association, which is the local lake association, has been very supportive. The Nature Conservancy, and in giving us that engineering, the preliminary engineering, not engineering, but restoration plan to allow us to apply for the grant. We've worked with the Kennebec County Soil and Water Conservation District, fisheries biologists from IF&W, of course the town of Chesterville. So we've had lots of partners all along the way that have helped us with the different pieces, and helped us overcome all of these hurdles. So hopefully, and as I said, by the end of October, this will all be 100% finished, and I can finally, after 10 years, like cross this one off the list. So great. So now, and at the end, if people have questions, happy to answer them.
Thank you, Leidy. Wow, it's exciting. Please keep us posted on your progress, and we hope it continues through the fall and there are no other unforeseen challenges. Thanks for that presentation. And yes, everyone, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. Next up is Christina Therian, Town Manager of the Town of Machias, and she'll be talking about Waterfront Renewal and Resilience Study. Okay, Christina, sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, I thought there'd be a couple of fun little pictures here to start with. And I wanted to say Machias has a long, proud history of using the waterfront. The river and the bay have not only been an economic catalyst, but an environmentally friendly haven that provides food and habitat to many birds, fish, and wildlife. So while the bay and environment continue to change and present challenges for the municipality, Machias is committed to adapting an intelligent, thoughtful manner that protects our businesses and the environment while focusing on our rich history. Could I have the next slide? And there you see all the lumber and things that used to come in and out of the river, out through the bay. So the process to further understand the impacts of the climate change to Machias really began, and this is a shout out, 7 years ago with a project that was produced for Washington County as part of Grow Washington Aroostook. That was done to HUD funding for a sustainable community grant. They did what was the climate vulnerability assessment for Washington County, and that was prepared by Tora Johnson of UMM and Judy East of the Washington County Council of Governments. It showed that not only were we having frequent and stronger storms, but a larger portion of precipitation became rain and not snow. So many important industries important to Washington County showed signs of change, including altered forest types and shifting range for commercial fish species. So they created an assessment where they developed storm protection maps for all of coastal areas of Washington County. To make the maps, they used the National Weather Service sea, lake, and overland surges from hurricanes, which they refer to as slosh models. And they did not use the FEMA maps. And I think I have next slide. I'll just point this out. This is what it looks like today along there. All of that wood cribbing used to be what supported the boats. But I think the next map, next slide is the map. They showed in their mapping, all of the red area is subject to flooding under their models. And I don't know how many people are familiar with Machias, but that is all of the downtown area of the economic drivers that sit below the hill. There's Helen's Restaurant, there's Bluebird Restaurant, there's the chamber, the town office, and our wastewater treatment plant all sit in that lower portion. And then there's the causeway that goes across the water, which eventually connects us to East Machias. So they didn't use the FEMA maps because they felt they could get much more reliable data, and the maps were old. In 2016, finally, the new FEMA maps were released, and the town was concerned about the changes and variation in the data comparison. And if you have the next picture, this is a new FEMA maps that came out, and we hired Ransom Consultant to do review and cross that with the data that was provided through the original project. And what we found was we were much more susceptible in some areas, and the impacts would be much greater depending on the storm surges and how it backfed. We also learned that our downtown is probably the most at risk of any in Washington County. Our downtown sits like a bowl, and the water back feeds from the bay. It topples the causeway right now. It back feeds up through our boat landing, and it also back feeds through the culverts and drainage system. So not only do we have a problem with the water coming in from that direction, we have a problem with the rainwater coming down to the bowl and not being able to get out when we're in a high tide situation. So it creates real issues. So with help from the Washington County Council of Governments, we applied for a grant with the Coastal Communities Program to fund the Machias Waterfront Resilience and Renewal Project. Our goals were to develop a feasible and economic analysis to assess hazards and plan for resiliency to storms and flooding, improve coastal access to the Machias riverfront, ensure a sustainable and vibrant coastal community, and support the creation of sustainable jobs and business opportunities by assessing seawall improvements to reduce coastal flooding while planning for downtown revitalization. Machias Savings Bank and the town of Machias each put in $2,500 of matching funds toward this. I don't have the number right off. I know on here, I think it was 45,000 and something that agency provided for us for this study. Again, we partnered with the COG, UMM, Ransom, and Hyatt Baker Designs. That part of the project was successfully completed in April of 2019. And from that, we took that information with the assistance of the COG and Baker Design. We submitted an application to FEMA for a pre-mitigation grant. And we were awarded $200,000 for that. We then applied, and I know that's on here, to the SHIP program to match this grant and for raising the boat landing and the grades at the boat landing and keep it from backfilling. And that's where we are right now. We're in the process of that. We've started, we've met on site. We started doing some test borings work. We've done survey work in the downtown and got a lot of elevations on all of our buildings. We've got the general design and layout of what needs to happen under the SHIP funding. We have a concept design of the river walk, and I guess I'd like to touch on just a few interesting things. This all came together because we are in the midst of doing our downtown plan update. We are in the midst of doing our comprehensive plan update. And the downtown plan calls for a river walk. It's been in there since the original plan was done in 2006, 2007, and has not been constructed. Let's see what else. We have developed over the course of this many partners. One of the other aspects is the Maine Coast Heritage Trust. You'll see a picture in just a little bit of a motel, and that was flooded numerous times over the years. They actually got a grant, bought the property, raised the money for us to demolish it if we agree to provide river access and open that up as a town park area, which we have now done, and it's very successful. People use it every day, and that'll be part of our overall plan to put in a river walk flood protection system. We have partnered with the Sunrise Trail Coalition. We have partnered with the Chamber of Commerce for tourism in the region and habitat, bird viewing. We've partnered and spoken with Downey Salmon Federation. Obviously the UMM GIS Lab and MDOT. There are many moving pieces to this project as MDOT is working on raising the causeway and putting new box culverts under that as replacement. We are also working on a sewer project that brings a new pump station line across under the riverbed higher up. And I guess the lessons learned is through the whole thing is to reach out to people right from the beginning and address concerns generally overall. And as you see, this picture that just came up, that's the property that we have now taken down. That was a storm in 2018. And then we have the next one that shows the ramp at the boat landing. And this was this past year. So I like to joke and say, this is the boat ramp that goes to nowhere. So we have a lot of concerns, but we have found that the funding agencies have been great. They like to see projects that are well thought out, that are working together, that have reached out to partners. And so I don't know what anybody else would like to know, but this last slide shows the proposed layout area of our flood protection system and river walk. And when we complete the work that we're doing now, we'll move forward to applying for actual construction funds. Right now, we're doing all of the, as I said, borings, testings, bank stability, and we'll be seeking prices on all the permits and things. So we expect that we will finish that up in 2022, along with the boat landing. So.
Thank you very much, Christina. This makes me want to take a trip up to Machias. We have time for one or two questions. We have one already, Christina. Do you have an overall cost for all of your planned interventions?
Are you talking the construction or all of the impacts altogether? I guess I would just like that clarified.
Wendy, if you want to clarify.
Yeah, just Christine, I'm just interested because of the size and scope of this compared to some of our other projects. Overall construction costs, overall costs for everything, including the planning and putting all this stuff in.
Okay, well, the Causeway project, I believe, is $2.5 to $3 million on the MDOT scale of it. We are currently under this project $200,000 plus the ship match is another 99. That's 300,000. We did the coastal community with the bank and the town funding, which was, as I said, 60,000. And the estimated construction for this is $10 million to $12 million. The pump station that we're currently working on is a $2 million project with the lines under the river. We're also considering dredging. I have no idea on any prices to do with the dredging as of yet. And the grant to the town to take down that building, demo that building and remove it, it was $163,000. So, as I said, a lot of moving pieces, a lot of costs and things, but we're just trying to take it one step at a time. That's all you really can do. And we're looking at the overall picture and trying to incorporate everything into it and work with everybody to make sure, you know, prime example, this last meeting that I had on the borings. You have a sewer engineer looking at borings to put a line under the river from the new pump station. And then you have engineers, Baker Design and Ransom, that were working on this one that are looking at doing borings to put anchors in the bank where there's not enough room to build an earthen berm. So to get them on here at the same time, it said, let's hire one boring firm to do all of it while they're here, so you don't have two mobilization charges, and make sure that we get borings that work for all parties involved and that we know what everybody's doing, so we don't end up putting a line down and then you know, having them put a structure somewhere that's not suitable. And I thought we had it pretty well covered. And then talking with Tora Johnson up at UMM, she brought up the fact that, well, if you're looking to dredge, there's borings that need to be taken to test for toxins in the riverbed. And you probably should get those done at the same time. So that's an aspect, even though we try to plan for everything, that's an aspect I never would have seen for the dredging piece of it. I've just not had the experience. So the more people you could talk to, the more of these type of sharing ideas and thoughts and trainings, I think the better we'll all be if we help each other out.
Thank you, Christina. Time for maybe one more for any of our case study presenters. Any other questions? You can jump right in if you have one. All right, well, there's always an opportunity to ask after the fact. And again, we'll be sharing all of these materials and information. I don't want to promise a timeline on that, but we will get that done. Wendy has a question. What is the best way to share our annual grant and grant workshop information with towns? That might be worth someone from a community answering. Anyone have any answer on that, suggestion? I know, Wendy, that somebody pointed out to me that your listserv was very helpful in the breakout session, that was the way that they found information about your programs.
Yep, I guess I'll just add, yeah, I administer a listserv for people that work in the watershed and water quality realm and work on a lot of our projects. There's about 200 people on that listserv, but I also have an email distribution list of people that might not want to hear about all the other workshops and publications that are put out. So if anyone wants to be added to either of those, please, you know, you could chime in on the chat box, but I was just wondering if there are other, and I know Ruta sends our grant announcements to the regional planning commissions, but I'm not sure if those go to all towns. So I don't know, I guess seems like there might be another way to reach.
The other suggestion might be the Island Institute Shore Up listserv, and Esperanza just mentioned Maine Municipal Association. Maybe there's a way we can find to better share with MMA. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but thank you all. Thanks to the three of you presenters. I always find that useful to hear from other local communities. So it's been a wonderful morning. I'm going to turn it back over to Nathan to wrap everything up.
Thanks, Victoria. Yes, I have the difficult task here of trying to summarize in 4 minutes all of the great discussion, which I will fail at, but I will make a first attempt. So some summary thoughts and next steps. One, we've heard really inspiring community stories and how they've used funding and worked with agencies and partners to help answer a lot of their issues, and I hope you all feel inspired and some common connections there. Some quick sub notes under that sort of big heading. There is funding available. We've heard some excellent tips for applying. You have maybe some new contacts to connect with. People are working very hard to think through and creatively work on funding projects, developing them, and that is, you know, helpful through relationships. Relationships matter. Partners matter in scoping projects and match, especially when we start thinking about the current budgets that we have. We have to recognize that incremental change is really important. A lot of the projects we heard about took 10 years to fully implement or are still underway. So let's think about, remember that incremental change is important and it can be a win. And there are other sort of outcomes from that. People can see visibility, which builds support, which may help with furthering, that funding that you need to get supported at the budget voting, you know, down the line. It gives you that visibility. So getting the community involved really helps at all stages. We've heard the importance of meeting early and often, scoping projects, pre-application meetings. We've heard offers from funding program managers that they're available, from technical assistance providers. Work with those folks to understand and develop a good projects. Think about regulations that apply. Think about the funding requirements. What are the criteria you're going to be evaluated on? Scope a good project so you know you spend your time efficiently. Talked about phasing, thinking about multiple different funding pots to use, and thinking sort of broadly about the goals of the project that may help you access different pots of money. We've also heard a lot of challenges. There's opportunities there. The state, lots of calls for assistance there, calls for a broader grouping of assistance providers to help provide that. We've talked about circuit riders, trainings, workshops. We've heard about grant writers. We've heard about regionalization and incentives regarding that. So certainly a wealth of information covered in a short period. And so I'm going to leave it there, knowing that there's so much more you all heard. But reminder that Martha, Victoria, and myself, through the New England Environmental Finance Center, through Casco Bay Estuary Partnership, through DEP, we're all here and available to help or to be connection to other assistance providers, other experts. If we don't have the answers, I know we're happy to do that. We look forward to that continued conversation. And so to that, the next steps are this is the first workshop in a 3-part series. If you're on this workshop, we'll include you in the emails going out for the next one. We're looking at October, November for that next workshop. We will have a focus on relevant recommendations from the Maine Climate Council and that apply to the topics discussed today. So we hope you will join us for that. That will be very timely. The council will be submitting a plan of final recommendations to the legislature in December. So this is a timely time to contribute to that, and we will make that a focus of our next workshop. And finally, crafting successful proposals will be a date to be announced maybe late this year or maybe beginning of next year. So please stay tuned for that. We also have a survey coming out to you, which we will get you, and a call for a request of some comprehensive list of funding, which is something we've been working on. We will get a list of that out to you all as well. So we really look forward to keeping in touch between now and the next workshop. Hopefully the door is just open. We'll just, say, let's connect, let's keep the conversation going, and we hope you all stay healthy, enjoy the weekend, the summer, and more to come. So thank you, really. Thank you to all our co-hosts, our presenters, and for all of you to stay with us all day. Talk more soon.
Thank you, everyone. Bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. It's a great session.
Thank you.